Is that better? Uh-huh. Tonight, as promised, I'm going to take you on a journey. A journey through your gastrointestinal tract. How important is it that we know something about the house we live in? Is that right? Do you know your house would not be livable if you didn't empty the rubbish, or you call it trash, is that right? Every day, we call it rubbish in Australia. In the islands you call it rubbish. Well, do you know, many bodies aren't working very well because the rubbish is not being eliminated every day. So what I want to do this evening is I want to show you what happens to that food that was on your plate today, and how it can be broken down to tiny little substances, because anything that goes into your gastrointestinal tract is not part of you. It's not part of you or me until it gets broken down to tiny little substances and then absorbed into the blood. And what does the Bible say the blood is? The life of the flesh. Then it becomes part of you or me. And so let us begin. The first place that the food goes in is the mouth. So this is mouth. And then there's it's called the esophagus. And then we come into the stomach. And it goes through a little valve called the pyloric sphincter. And on this side is the liver. And underneath the liver is the gallbladder. So let us do some labelling here to help you remember. That's liver. Gallbladder is the little reservoir that holds the bile. So that's that little bit there. This is the large intestine. Now at the bottom here is the appendix. That's where the small intestine comes in. So there's the large intestine, and there's a little loop before everything comes out. Now in here is the pancreas. So the pancreas basically, I'll put some little dots there to show you, it's behind the large intestine. Now we'll follow this small intestine, and it comes down here and it loops around and around and around. So that's basically what we look like inside, but we can't see it, can we? So his stomach is this one here. This is colon, is the large, another name for the large intestine. Small intestine is this many feet in here. So I just wanted to draw for you your gastrointestinal tract before we begin our journey. And so we're going to have a look at the different organs. We're going to have a look at the pH environment. We're going to have a look at the different enzymes that break down the different foods. And we're going to look at those foods. This is what happens when you're only 5'2". But I don't have to reach up that high anymore. So let's begin with the mouth. Mouth is it's quite an alkaline environment. Now, many people don't think of the mouth as an organ of digestion, but it is. And the mouth's the only part of the body we have say over in digestion. We have say over what goes in, yeah? We have say over when it goes in. We have say over how much goes in, is that right? And we have say over how long it stays in the mouth, and we have say over the environment where it enters. That's why there should be never any controversial issues discussed at the table, because I think we all know what that does to digestion. What does it do? Stops it. So did you get those 5 things? What goes in? We have say over when it goes in. We have say over how long it's in there. We have say over the environment where it comes in. Did I say how much? Anyway, all of that. Now in the mouth, there are only 2 foods that are broken down in the mouth. And a lot of people don't realise that some of the food is broken down in there. Underneath the tongue, there are sublingual glands, and they release an enzyme called lingual lipase. And lingual lipase, whenever you see the word lipase, that's an enzyme that breaks down fat, but only one type of fat, and that is saturated fat. And the saturated fat that is the best saturated fat is the coconut. So coconut oil is unique in that the breakdown begins in the mouth. Something else is broken down in the mouth, and that is starch. Well, it begins in the mouth. Now, to explain this, I need to go way back to when you were a baby. Now, in the first year of life, 4 teeth appear, 4 at the top and 4 at the bottom. And those teeth are called milk teeth, because do you know what all babies should be eating? Milk. Got that? Milk. That's why they're called milk teeth. Do you know that 200 years ago, babies were not fed food? They had milk. Milk. Got that? But that's also taste time, because when a baby sits about 7.5 months and starts putting everything in their mouth, and am I right? Everything goes in. I've got a little video clip my daughter sent me of my little granddaughter in Tasmania, and she's picking up dirt and leaves. Everything goes in. It's actually taste time. What's that baby doing? She's tasting what dirt tastes like. She's tasting what leaves taste like. And if they see a caterpillar, what'll happen? I remember my first daughter burnt her hand. Oh, doesn't it break your heart? And when she woke up, I looked at her and she was sitting there peeling off the blister and eating it. So who's got to have the brains behind what is fed to a baby? The baby? No. Someone said, my baby's ready to eat, it's just grabbing at everything. Yeah, that's right, everything. If you put blocks there, and the babies will suck on their big toes. You know, it's test time. So that's when you can give baby a hunk of celery. A little bit of cucumber. Won't they choke? And if they do, it'll just come up, right? You also give the baby do you say hunk? A bit of apple in a net bag. It's taste time. Taste time. Now, the next teeth that come through are the molars. They come through here, and they come through anywhere between 14 to 22, 24 months of age. Now, when those molars come through, what do molars do? Grind. What do we grind? Grain. Grain. And it's not until the molars are through that the glands in the mouth release ptyalin. Now, ptyalin is a salivary amylase, and ptyalin breaks down starch. Okay. What's the first food many mothers are told to give their babies? Cereal? At what age? Porridge. What age? 6 months? Okay, students, can they digest it? No, why not? Because the ptyalin isn't made till when? The molars come through. When do they come through? 14, 16, 22 months of age. How much sense does that make? Are you interested in lying on your back and being fed slop? Do you know what slop is? Isn't that what they do to babies? How much sense does that make? And you know what happens? Then that baby does not develop the ability to chew, and it can't chew anything. I was looking at my daughter, her little 9.5-month-old baby, John Clancy, and she gave him a little tiny bit of mango, his first food. It was about as big as a pea. And do you know what that baby did when it went in his mouth? Can you see that? But when babies continually just fed sloppy stuff, they never learn to chew. I heard of a little boy, 5, going to school that just wanted slop, because that's all he'd ever have. Can you see it defies reason? I never made baby food, never. I would not give my babies food till they had teeth. Does that make sense? And they could sit, and they could do it themselves. My son James, he's my eldest son, he's just turned 40. Built like this, you can see a picture of him in the back of my book. He didn't eat any food till he was 16 months of age. Have you ever heard such a thing? Well, do you know, I was helping a lady, a little baby, Lucas, very preemie baby. And she contacted me at 10 months. How many teeth would the baby have had at 10 months? Probably about 4. And he's only small, because he was preemie. So she's trying to feed him up. Bread, pasta, cereal. Rashes all over him, and he's thin. I said, you got to stop all that. That little baby has no Tylenol to break down the starch. She didn't know that. Do you remember what I said last night in that little book, Ministry of Healing? It says, the only hope of better things is the education of the people in the right principles. She said, what'll I feed him? Is he breastfed? Yes. Don't give him any food until he's got a tummy full of milk. Because what are those first teeth called? Milk teeth. And just give him some fruits, some veggies. Ideally, see, I never fed a baby. They should feed themselves. Got that? Feed themselves. And if you start them late, they don't make a terrible mess. So the rashes went down. He started to be a happier baby. I didn't hear anything. Then she contacted me when he was 14 months of age. She said, Barbara, he stopped crawling and he will not eat anything, only have milk. So I begin to investigate. Remember this? Always there. Oh, he's teething. You know when a baby teethes, they're a bit clingy, they go off their food. Oh, sounds all right, he's teething. When the teeth come through, he'll be right. Then she emailed me back. She said, what if he gets brain damage? Where's this coming from? I said, why would he get brain damage? Well, he's only having breast milk. I said, God made the milk perfect. Am I right? And then her father contacts me. I'm a scientist at Loma Linda University. I'm very worried about my grandson. We believe that his brain's not going to develop. Now I knew where it was coming from. I said, why wouldn't his brain develop? Well, he's not eating any food. He stopped crawling. I said, yeah, but he's a preemie baby. They'll be later. We think the baby should be taken to hospital and tested to make sure it's getting all the nutrients. Okay, how do they test? Blood. Is that going to hurt the baby? Oh, yes, that's going to be traumatic. And if they feel the baby's not getting enough food, what are they going to do? Hold him, put a funnel in his mouth and throw the food in? Oh, no, they're more civilized than that. They'll put a tube down the back, down the nose. Is that going to stress the baby out? Oh, no, we'll put a drip in. Have you ever tried to put, how do you put a drip into it? Can you see you have to take it to the end? You have to explore, where's this going to go? Where's this going to go? And what if the baby gets so traumatized the baby even stops feeding breast milk? And then I said something to the man. I said, 200 years ago, babies were not fed food. It's a recent phenomenon. It defies reason, by the way. One lady said, where's the science to prove what you're saying, Barbara? Just go to an anatomy and physiology book. Have a look at when the teeth come through. Have a look at when the Tylen's released. It's just common sense. And who writes most baby feeding brochures? Turn around and look on the back. Rice cereal, Farax, Heinz baby food. What are they going to tell you? The sooner you feed your baby, the smarter your baby will be. Have you heard that one? Do you know you can find research to support anything? Is that right? So I said to this man, do you know what that means? Einstein, Galileo, Jesus, the prophets, Handel, Bach, our great inventors of times past, they were not fed food sometimes till they were 3 or 4 years old. Just search the history books. Didn't seem to give them brain damage. Can you see my reasoning? He settled down. I said, the teeth will come through, the baby will start eating and crawling. Well, 2 weeks later, I get an email, the teeth have come through, the baby's starting to crawl, baby's starting to eat. The father emailed me, he said, thank you so much. Can I give you something? I said, if you want. $400 in my account. Because that man knew. He knew what would have happened if that baby goes to hospital. Can you see? Now remember, if I got any room to say this, we should never make decisions on this. They're about to go to hospital and have those babies put through those terrible tests because of what? Fear. We need to make our decisions on fact. And when we've got the facts, what have we got then? Faith. Faith that can move mountains. Now we come through to the stomach. And the stomach is not an alkaline environment, is it? Do you know what it is? It's acid. And if someone says to me, I've got a very acid stomach, I say, fantastic. It should be acid. By the way, how do you know it's acid? Well, I can feel it. Do you know what that means? You haven't got a nice thick mucosa wall lining your stomach. Why would that be? Possibly because of dehydration. Because that thick mucosa lining is mostly water. Well, it's acid because it keeps coming up. Well, there are 2 little gates here called the cardiac sphincter. And those 2 gates are designed to stop acid coming up into the esophagus. I've met people whose acid's coming up so much that all the lining of the esophagus is getting ulcerated. And so what does the doctor give them? Antacids. What's going to break the protein down now? Can you see that? To give a person antacids because they've got reflux is like shooting all the horses because they keep getting out of the gateway. Just shut the gate. Just shut the gate. So why is the gate open? Isn't that what we should be asking? Well, it's because a lot of people eat their main meal at the end of the day. And then they lie down. And what's happening to the gateway? It's getting pushed and pushed. Plus, that little cardiac sphincter is a muscle. And when a muscle is relaxed, that muscle's relaxed, it's closed. When it tightens, it opens. So stress. Can you see that? Stress. So how do you heal reflux or heartburn, acid coming up? Eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, and supper like a pauper. And take magnesium. What will magnesium do? Close that. Is it that simple? Aren't you glad it's simple? It's so simple, it's often bypassed. So let's have a look at what's happening in the stomach. The lining of the stomach looks like this. And those folds are lined with gastric glands. And those gastric glands, 3/4 of them, release mucus. And that causes a thick mucosal lining on the stomach. Down here, these gastric glands release hydrochloric acid and pepsinogen. And pepsinogen and hydrochloric acid, they unite in the stomach to release pepsin. And pepsin is the enzyme that breaks down protein. Now the reason why pepsin isn't released, because as it's released, it could eat away the stomach wall. Isn't God good? So the hydrochloric acid's released and the pepsinogen, and they unite in the acid stomach to release pepsin. And pepsin will only work in an acid stomach of about 2.5 pH. That's very acid. And these are only released. And the hydrochloric acid, of course, is contributing to make it a very acid environment. So if someone's taking antacids, can you see what's happening? How do these two unite, and how does this even break down the protein? Do you know what they're finding? Long-term antacid use is causing colon cancer. Because the acid's not there, the protein's not getting broken down properly, it comes way down here, it's only half broken down, and the colon says, "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be broken down up there." It's, "Oh, sorry, but they're taking antacids." And so what happens now is the colon has to make extra bacteria to try and to break it down somehow, and that extra bacteria can start eating away at the wall of the stomach. There's your stomach. There's your colon cancer. One man said to me, "Oh, I've been on Nexium or the equivalent for 25 years. Is it working? 25 years? Huh? Can you see that common sense isn't very common today? So what would also interfere with this process? When a person's dehydrated, they're not making enough mucus, so that stomach wall can start breaking down if there's not that protection. And if a person's drinking with their meals, and isn't that an American habit? That brings the pH up to 3.5 or even 4. And they can't connect in that environment, and pepsin can't work in that environment. And the body knows that, so digestion stops. The water has to be taken out to try and bring the pH back to 2.5 so the stomach can resume digestion. What would also interfere with it? Notice how many stomachs we've got. 1. Do you know cows, sheep, goats, they've got several, so they can eat all day. But we've got one stomach. And we should eat and then leave the stomach alone, and then digestion will take 3 to 4 hours. Have you ever had a 4-hour job to do and you keep getting interrupted? And it's 8 hours later and the job's still not done? That's exactly what happens when a person's eating all day long. And isn't that an American habit? Some say, eat every couple of hours and it'll raise your metabolic rate. Have you heard that one? Yeah. That's like the jockey on the horse in a horse race. The horse is going fast, he wants it to go fast, so he gets the whip out and he whips the horse and it goes faster because it's being whipped. That's what a person's doing to their stomach. Put a bit of food in. A few hours later, more food in. What's it doing? More. And by irritation, it raises the metabolic rate, but not very effectively. The only way to raise your metabolic rate effectively is exercise. That's what does it. So there's only one way that you can go the distance between meals, because the fact is the stomach then likes a rest of 1 hour. So the only way you can do that is to have a high fibre meal and generous amounts of protein, because it's protein that's broken down in the stomach, and healthy fats. Healthy fats are fats that came from the hand of the Creator. There's your coconut, there's your avocado, there's your nuts, your seeds, and your coconut oil and olive oil. If someone says, no, we shouldn't be eating olive oil, Barbara, I say that's very unbiblical. Because when Elijah was fed by the widow for 3 years, do you remember the story? What did God put in the little widow's cruse every night? Olive. So what's God just telling us about olive oil? It's good. How come the Bible doesn't talk about coconut oil? Because no coconuts grow in Palestine. Can you see that? But coconut's been used for centuries. So what's your best protein? Legumes, beans, nuts and seeds. And one man said, I can't eat beans, they give me terrible gas. I said, well, it's the way they're being cooked. You soak them, then you rinse them. Then you bring them to the boil and you rinse them again. And then you put them on a low heat. And when they're half cooked, you throw the water away again and rinse them again. And then you've got another pot that's got a beautiful sauce in it, tomatoes and onions. And then you put your half-cooked beans in there, and then you let that have another hour. You see, that's dirty water. So you know when you bring your beans to the boil and all the froth's on top, what do you think that is? Gas, right? It's got to go. So many people don't realise how to do your beans. Wash that water away. So let me tell you something now about hydrochloric acid. Hydrochloric acid not only connects with pepsinogen to produce pepsin to break down your protein, hydrochloric acid kills bacteria and yeast and fungus. So let's say you're eating something and you don't realise that there may be some bacteria or yeast on it, and it gets into your stomach, hydrochloric acid will kill it. Isn't that good news? Do you know what that means? The only people that get food poisoning are people with low hydrochloric acid. Do you remember my initial statement when someone said, I've got a very acid stomach? What's my response? Great. I'm jealous. What are the symptoms of someone having low hydrochloric acid? It's 6 hours later and they're still full. They feel like they've just eaten. So what can you do for low hydrochloric acid? There's a few things you can do. And very important, to eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, tea like a pauper. Also important to leave a rest between meals, and don't drink with the meal. We should stop drinking half an hour before the meal and resume drinking hour and a half to 2 hours after the meal. If a person's thirsty at the meal time, by all means have a mouthful. That's not going to do a lot. But there are a few things you can do, and one is you can take 1/4 teaspoon of cayenne pepper in a little bit of water just before the meal. That'll wake anything up, won't it? Are you familiar with the book Jethro Kloss, by Jethro Kloss, called Back to Eden? He devotes half a page to every herb. He devotes 10 pages to cayenne pepper. Now, a lot of people get a bit confused with cayenne pepper. They think it's a stimulant. Well, it's not a stimulant like caffeine or tobacco, which are nervous system stimulants. It's a blood stimulant. And anything that stimulates blood, what's the blood? Life. It's a remarkable healer. So when that cayenne pepper gets into the stomach, it'll wake up your gastric glands. sense? The other thing you can do to boost hydrochloric acid is to take the juice of a lemon in a little bit of very hot water just before the meal. And that lemon is acid. On Friday night, I'm going to talk about the acid-alkaline balance in the body. And you'll see lemon's acid where it should be, which is stomach. Alkaline where it should be, which is at the cell. Now there's another tea, and I'm going to give you the recipe. We call it Digiti Tea, digestive tea. And these are bitter herbs that stimulate the release of hydrochloric acid. And they are roots, so you'll buy the roots. So it's 1 part gentian. Gentian's a very bitter herb. It's 1 part dandelion, another bitter herb. It's 1 part licorice. Licorice is not a bitter herb, but it's an emollient. And it's wonderful for the stomach because it helps lining that stomach. And 1/2 part golden seal. Golden seal, I cannot buy it in Australia at the moment. I have to get it in America. It's a very valuable herb. It takes 7 years before they can harvest it. And it's called King of Tonics to all mucous membranes. So you mix all those roots up in a jar. And the recipe is 1 teaspoon of the herbs and 1 teaspoon of fresh ginger. See, fresh ginger is like a sweet bitter. And that's to 2 cups of water. And a gentle simmer. Because they're roots, they need a gentle simmer for about 10 minutes. What's the dose? The dose is 1/3 cup hot just before the meal. So when your mouth tastes those bitter herbs, it gives a message to the brain to release more gastric enzymes. And little by little by little, as the days and the weeks go by, your liver gets the message to make more of these digestive enzymes. And eventually the body starts working well and digestion improves. I had one lady, she said, I've been on digestive enzymes for years. I've been 1 month on this tea and my digestion is so much better. Psalm 104 verse 14, the Bible says, God gave herbs for the service of man. I love that verse. The herbs come in and say, where would you like me? These herbs gently revive and restore gastric function. You see, our body's designed to heal itself, and what these herbs do is they work with the body. Medicine calls it synergism. The Bible calls it service. How long would you need to take it for? How long is a piece of string? As long as it takes. So stomach is acid, and it releases the pepsin, and the pepsin breaks down protein. Now that is the only thing that happens in the stomach. Actually, something else happens. And a lot of people get confused on this one. B12. So let me use my fingers to illustrate this. That's B12 in our food. What food do you find it in? Organic root vegetables, homegrown vegetables. Did you know that? It's a bacteria. And it's bound up with R protein. And when it gets into the stomach, hydrochloric acid releases it. So if you've got If you've got low hydrochloric acid, can you see you can have B12 problems? Because it hasn't disconnected R protein from B12. Now what's also released in the stomach is intrinsic factor. Intrinsic factor and B12 float together till they get down to the last part of the small intestine. They unite, and the intrinsic factor is necessary to get that B12 absorbed in. So can you see the few things that need to be there? If someone's got gut problems, they're drinking with every meal, they're eating all day long, they're stressed out with the meal, they're having the large meal at the end of the day, not only can't they releasing the hydrochloric acid, but it's interfering or compromising the release of the intrinsic factor. So no wonder they're going to have low B12. Meat eaters and vegetarians alike can have B12 problems. Because it's not actually what you're eating, it's what your gut does with it. You see that? In fact, when your B12 is absorbed, it goes into an enterohepatic circulatory pathway. Hepatic is liver, and it's circulated between here and the liver. Do you know what that means? You can have no B12 in your diet for 30 years before you show a deficiency, because it's constantly being recycled. I never take B12 supplements. So if someone's got low B12, they should go on the digestive tea. To boost digestion. Make sure they're not drinking with the meals. Make sure they're not eating all day long. Make sure they're exercising. Exercise increases blood supply everywhere. So that's the B12 story. And it's an interesting story, isn't it? Now we're moving down to the duodenum. Now the duodenum is this bit here, first part of the small intestine. It's called the duodenum. And it's a very busy place. There's a lot happening. And it's an alkaline environment. And to make sure it's an alkaline environment, your pancreas releases sodium bicarbonate to help bring it to alkaline, because when the food comes through, there's a bit of acid mixed with it. Now, with it in the duodenum, we've got a few things happening. So first of all, let's look at the liver. Now what happens is, this is the gallbladder. The bile duct comes down and connects with the neck of the pancreas. And the bile comes and releases into the duodenum. So we've got liver here. Remember what the gallbladder is? It's just a reservoir for the bile. So the liver releases an enzyme called bile. And bile breaks down polyunsaturated fats. So most of your nuts and seeds are polyunsaturated fats. So that's what the liver does via the gallbladder through the bile duct. And we've also got the pancreas. Now see, the pancreas, it's releasing things too. Now the pancreas releases pancreatic lipase. And lipase is an enzyme that further breaks down the polyunsaturated fats. Now remember, your saturated fat, where does it get broken down? The mouth. But all the other fats, they have to wait till they get down here. Bile breaks it down into tiny particles. Pancreatic lipase further breaks it down. The pancreas also releases pancreatic amylase. Now remember, ptyalin is a salivary amylase. And ptyalin starts the starch breakdown. But when the starch gets into the stomach, digestion stops, because now it's acid. And it's put on hold till it gets to the duodenum. We're back to alkaline. And then pancreatic amylase finalises starch digestion. There's all your grains, your cereals, your pastas, breads. The pancreas also releases trypsin. And trypsin is an enzyme that finalises protein. It also releases another enzyme called chymotrypsin, and it also finalises protein. Now, I've got some good news. It's not going to get any more difficult than this. So, students, what's the main organ of digestion? Pancreas. How many people think all their digestion happens in the stomach? When a person has pancreatitis, cancer of the pancreas, they usually die from malnutrition. Can you see why? So let me tell you something interesting. Pepsin is what's called a proteolytic enzyme. It's a proteolytic enzyme. Trypsin and chymotrypsin are also proteolytic enzyme. Well, God is so good because He's put some proteolytic enzyme in some foods. One is in the papaya. It contains a proteolytic enzyme called papain. And the core of the pineapple contains bromelain. And bromelain is also a proteolytic enzyme. Oh, how good is God. Now, you'd have to eat a lot of pineapple cores, and you'd have to eat a lot of pawpaws to get enough. So you can buy papain and bromelain in tablet form. So it's the concentrate. So anyone that has pancreatic problems, they need to go on those tablets. I shall move this, shall I? And you can see. So pepsin released in the stomach, trypsin and chymotrypsin released in the pancreas are proteolytic enzymes, and a proteolytic enzyme breaks down protein. Papain from the papaya and bromelain from the core of the pineapple are both proteolytic enzymes. So let's just recap that. In the mouth, starch starts its breakdown, and the saturated fats, starch, they break down with lingual lipase released under the tongue. In the acid environment of the stomach, starch digestion is stopped, and pepsin starts the breakdown of protein. This is what protein looks like. Now, pepsin breaks the protein down to peptides and polypeptides. And then it travels down into the duodenum, and trypsin and chymotrypsin break the peptides down to amino acids, and the polypeptide down to amino acid and peptide, and then to amino acids. It's only as amino acids that it can be absorbed out of the gut and into the blood. Now, if someone's drinking with their meals, eating all day long, stressed out all the time, can you see the protein isn't going to get it broken down to peptides and polypeptides? And so peptides and polypeptides come into the duodenum. And that's when the pancreas says, what are you doing here? And the trypsin and the chymotrypsin can only break that down to that. And because there's no amino acids, maybe the odd one, it can't be absorbed. And that's the partially digested protein that gets into the colon. Extra bacteria is created to try and deal with it. That creates a lot of bad gas. can you see that at every stage of digestion is important? Is very important. You know, the quote they had on the board of, I think it's in Exodus, where God says, I will not put any of these diseases that I'll put upon the Egyptians. But notice what it says, if you will hearken to my voice, if you will keep my statutes. Can you see there are laws in the gut? And you've got to abide by them. The first law is chew slowly, because there are no teeth in your stomach. You got to chew very well. And you got to chew so everything gets mixed up with the saliva. And when you're chewing nice and slowly, the message is going to the brain, oh, there's a bit of fat there. Oh, it's a saturated fat. Oh, that's a polyunsaturated fat. Then the brain says, okay, liver, there's a bit of polyunsaturated fat coming. Okay, pancreas, can you see what's happening? And if a person's going chew, chew, swallow, the organs are saying, what's coming? And the brain says, I don't know. I don't know what's going on here. Can you see the problem usually begins with babies being fed slop, so they don't learn to chew? If someone rings me at lunchtime, I say, excuse me, but I'm already doing something very important. Eating my lunch. I'll ring back later. It's a very important part of the day. Take time. A beautiful Spirit of Prophecy quote is, cast off care and anxious thought when you sit to dine. It's a nice thought. Now, we're coming to the grand finale of digestion. Most of our food is absorbed when it gets halfway down the small intestine. And the small intestine is lined with little villi that look like that. And do you remember I told you last night, the cells are remade every 3 to 5 days, and they're travelling up, and away they go, every 3 to 5 days. Now up the middle of this villi is a lacteal. That's part of your lymphatic system. Let me get some colours. And all through that villi is the blood. And remember, the main aim of your digestive tract is to break the food down to singular structures so they can be absorbed through and into the blood. Now, when we were in our mother's womb, our gut was sterile, no microbes. And when we were born, we were literally showered with our mother's microorganisms. Unfortunately today, some women are being told that the last few months of pregnancy, they've got strep B. Have you heard of this one? They have a urine test. You've got strep B. You have to take antibiotics, or when the baby's born, the baby might get strep B and die. Do you know no babies died? One mother said, I was told my baby might be blind. It's not true. Never should we make a decision on this. So the mothers don't want their babies to be blind. They don't want to lose their babies. So they take the antibiotics. You know what that does? That breaks down and compromises their gut flora. So when the baby's born, what does the baby get? Compromised gut flora. I had 6 babies. I was never tested for strep B. I might have had it, I might not have had it. When you think of it, our gut is full of microbes. In fact, we might all have it. There was a show last year, actually in 2016 in Australia. It's a documentary called Catalyst, and they did a show called The Gut Reaction. And they had an obstetrician there. And he said, I always thought God made a mistake putting the birth canal and the anus so close. To the point where they used to give women enemas because they didn't want anything coming out of there anywhere near that baby. He said, we now know it's a perfect design. Because when the birth canal opens, what also stretches open a bit? And what's the air like coming out of there? Laden with microbes. And the baby's face touches the air and the baby goes, ah! And what's that first breath laden with? Microbes. Notice what the obstetrician said, perfect design. And when that baby breathes in that first air, those microbes come in and they form a thick layer, a thick turf layer around the villi. And the colostrum, that thick, yellow, creamy, milky substance that's in the breasts for 3 days until the milk comes through, it's also rich in these microbes. Do you know that a farmer knows that if a cow dies in childbirth, if he doesn't get that calf onto another cow that's just had a baby, that cow may die, and if it doesn't die, it will always be sickly because it didn't get the mother's colostrum. In fact, if you give a newborn baby calf the milk in the supermarket, do you know that the calf will die? Bit scary, isn't it? But the mother that had the antibiotics in pregnancy, can you see what's happening? It's killing off. It's killing off some of that gut flora. And last night, I showed you the 4 things that the gut flora does. It's responsible for the final breakdown of our food. It particularly releases B vitamins. It also is responsible for the absorption of the nutrients through and into the blood. Those microbes play a protective role. They protect the blood against any harmful pathogens that might be in the gut, and they nourish the cells that line the gut. And remember, they're made every 3 to 5 days. How important are those microbes? They have found babies that are born via caesarean section, their gut is lined with skin flora. Because what's their first breath getting? They're coming out here instead of that other place. They've got skin flora lining their gut, and they find babies born via caesarean section are more prone to allergies, more prone to sicknesses. If a baby's born via caesarean section, the mother should be told to paint her nipple with a probiotic every morning to help replace that gut flora. So when you've got a breakdown in this gut flora, can you say you've got a compromise in the grand finale of digestion? You're not getting a proper breakdown of your food. Absorption's been compromised. Your border protection's gone down. I just came into America. Wow, they really go through you, don't they? They're trying to protect America, yeah? Some say, well, I'm a little old lady. Well, do you know, in Australia, 2 little old ladies were arrested because they were smuggling marijuana. Sorry, you can't even trust the little old ladies. And those gut floras also nourishing the gut. Have you heard of leaky gut? What's causing the leaks? Do you know the things that can break down that gut flora are antibiotics? We looked at that last night. And I'm not against antibiotics, but they should be only used to save lives. Do you know what that means? Most people should go through their whole life never having it. My son James is 40 now, never had one yet. How nice. Do you ever hear that? Rarely. So antibiotics, contraceptive pill can break it down. Statin drugs can break it down. On Thursday night, I'm giving a lecture on the liver, and I'm going to tell you the truth on cholesterol. I'm going to give you the facts on how damaging cholesterol-lowering medication is. So your statin drugs, which are your cholesterol-lowering medication, your Nurophens, a lot of pain-killing medication breaks that down. And once that's broken down, you've got a compromise. I had a man do our program, and he was from Kenya. He's 40, and he had irritable bowel disease. Irritable bowel syndrome or colitis or Crohn's disease, you've heard of these? It's inflammation of the gastrointestinal tract. And I told him to do three things. Number one, take a probiotic every morning. Probiotic means for life, and a probiotic is putting the microbes in to help re-turf this turf wall. Number two, he had to stop the three most irritating foods to that gut, and that is dairy and refined sugar and the hybridized wheat of today. The hybridized wheat of today is not the wheat that God made. In the 1950s, wheat was hybridized to produce a plant with a high yield. You see, wheat used to grow that high, but wheat only grows this high now because it has to have a thick stem to hold that heavy yield of grain. They did it in the 1950s to help with the starvation crisis in Africa, in India, Mexico, and it helped, and no one complains about that. But what was never addressed was the effect of this hybridized wheat on the human body. And it's causing so many problems. The hybridization of the wheat produced a very complex protein or gluten structure. And almost only a cast iron gut can break that down, and there aren't many of them around anymore. Now, the third thing that we did with this young man with irritable bowel syndrome is we gave him slippery elm. Slippery elm is the powdered bark of the slippery elm tree, and it's pretty slippery. And that's what your gut loves. The lining of your gut is like the inside of your gum. It's a little bit slimy, and that's designed to coat and soothe. And when the gut's irritated, it needs something soothing, and that's what slippery elm will do. Slippery elm contains a growth stimulant, which means it can stimulate rapid healing in the lining of the gut. It's also anti-inflammatory. So it coats, soothes, and heals the lining of the gut. Now, there is another herb that will do that, and that's aloe vera. It's also a little bit slimy, isn't it? And that's what the gut loves. So let me tell you the story of this man, Tom. When I consulted with him, I discovered that these were the three main foods that he ate. He ate bread morning, noon, and night. He had lots of cups of tea with milk in it and drank milk, and he had sugar in all his cups of tea, and sometimes he had butter and lots of jam. I think you call it jelly, is that right? On his bread. Now, he's a very quiet man. Now, he'd just had a flare-up. And because he'd had a flare-up, he was put on cortisone and anti-inflammatory. And he was easing off his cortisone. And the first 2 days at our retreat, well, Monday, Tuesday, are juicing days. And I thought, he might get even more diarrhea. So I said to him on Monday, about the middle of the day, "How are you going?" And this is all he'd ever say, "Good." Good, that's all he'd ever say. I said, how many times have you gone today? 2. He was a bit embarrassed about talking about it. He ended up going 4 times that day. You see, we were giving him slippery elm 4 times a day. Okay? Now, if he was going 10 times a day, I'd give him that every half hour. Can you see that? You ease back when it settles down. It's getting worse, a little bit more. Tuesday. So end of Tuesday I talked to him. How are you going? Good. How many times are you going? 4. That's impressive. Very impressive. He was going about 8 times when he came. Wednesday, he starts eating. How are you going? Good. How many times? 4. So I said, well, I think you can stop your anti-inflammatories because there's obviously no inflammation there. I said, do you have any pain or cramping? No, it's all gone. Are you passing blood? No, I've stopped that. Now, you and I would be jumping up and down and screaming from the mountaintops because that's so exciting. But he was just good. Friday. How are you going? Good. How many times are you going? 3. Wow. And he stopped his anti-inflammatories. I said, I think you can stop your cortisone. Can you see when you stop the medication? Can you see that? When you're starting to get a response by what you're doing. Don't stop the medication because then you get a huge flare-up. Implement this. As the body responds, then you can ease off the medication. When he left Sunday morning, he was on no medication, he had no pain, no cramping, no bleeding, the stools were formed and he was going 3 times a day. That's miraculous. Now, do you know why he had such a quick response? Because we'd stopped what was irritating it. How many people with irritable bowel and Crohn's realise that they are irritating it? We were giving him probiotic. We were giving him the slippery elm. Can you see we were putting everything into place? He was excited, very excited. Let me tell you something else that's happening with this hybridized wheat and the dairy. Now, when the hybridized wheat and the dairy break down in the gut, they break down to caseo, that's the dairy, morphine. What's morphine? Opiate derivative. And the wheat breaks down to glutamorphine. Now, caseomorphine, for purposes of illustration, will look like that. There's the caseo, there's the morphine. This is glutamorphine. So let me show you what's happening in the gut. Now, this is a very happy cell because it's got gut flora to nourish it. This one here is a very unhappy cell because there's no gut flora to nourish it. We'll just do the gluto. Glutamorphine comes along here. That happy cell knocks off the morphine so only gluto gets in. Caseomorphine comes in, it knocks off the morphine and only caseo gets in. Glutamorphine comes here. That unhappy cell cannot knock off the morphine. So what happens is glutamorphine gets in, and by the way, caseomorphine get in. They go, remember you've lost your border protection. The cells aren't getting nourished, they can't do their job. That gets taken by the blood to the brain, the opiate receptor sites pick it up. There's a book called Grain Brain by Dr. David Pert-Muller, he's a neuroscientist. He quotes psychiatrists who take their schizophrenic, bipolar patients off wheat, dairy, refined sugar, 50% improvement. Can you see why? There's another book called Gut and Psychology by Natasha Campbell McBride. She says the same thing. Dr. Bruce Fife in his book Stop Alzheimer's Now, Stop Alzheimer's Now, he says the same thing. They don't even know each other. In the multitude of counsellors, there's safety. There's safety. There's wisdom. One lady said to me who'd had irritable bowel for 30 years, is her medication working? Huh? She heard this, she said, no one's ever told me that. And I've had this condition for 30 years. Well, in Australia grows a lot of wheat. What are they going to tell you? Does America grow a lot of wheat? What are they going to tell you? Huh? Is there a wheat you can eat? Well, the original wheat was called inkhorn, and you can get inkhorn wheat. And there are a couple of wild hybrids, natural field hybrids from the original wheat. One's called spelt, and the other one's called kamut. But if someone's got irritable bowel, I would say stop all of that. Heal the gut. And then, guess what? You might be able to start having a little bit. But if your gut's not working, you've got to stop. It's not forever. It's just until your gut is healed. And if someone with irritable bowel says, but I love wheat, I'd say, oh, okay. And I'd move on to the next person. God gave us choice. Is that right? It's not forever. It's not forever. Hippocrates said all disease begins in the gut. And he didn't know what I've just shown you. Again, if you want to pursue that anymore, there's a book called Wheat Belly by Dr. William Davis. He shows you what's happened to the wheat. Whereas Grain Brain by Dr. David Pertmuller and Gut and Psychology by Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride, they go into a little bit more detail in what I've just shown you here. Those doctors have decades of clinical practice up their sleeve. And those books weren't influenced by the dairy industries, the cereal industry, the wheat industry, the grain industry, or the meat industry. Did you hear that? So now the food is coming through into the large intestine. And here we have the appendix. And did you know that God did not make a mistake when he put it there? Does God make mistakes? No, he did not. One lady said to me, I had my right ovary taken out. It had a cyst on it. Do you know the right ovary is about there? And the doctor said, oh, while I was there, I took your appendix. It's got no right to do that. You almost have to get them to sign a piece of paper before you go under. Ideally, we fix up the body so we don't have to go under. So what does the pancreas do? The pancreas does two main things. It's called the colon's oil can. So it lubricates the contents so it gets through with ease. And it also releases antibacterial fluid, because if what's coming out here has got a lot of meat in it, which putrefies, and then they had a lot of sugar for dessert, which is actually feeding the putrefaction process, by the time it comes out of here, it's pretty bad.
You mean the appendix? You said the pancreas.
I'm sorry, the appendix. I've got a problem, I mixed my words up. So please correct me. So the appendix is releasing antibacterial fluid, because what's coming out of there sometimes is pretty nasty. You see, meat putrefies. Dogs get away with it because their gut is 6 foot long. It's only 1 metre long. Ours is about 8.5 metres long. So by the time it's getting down here, it's pretty bad. Have you ever left meat in a warm environment? But there's one meat that will grow worms quicker than any other meat. You know what that is? It's the pork. So that's why the Garden of Eden diet is a vegetarian diet. You see, vegetables ferment, whereas meat putrefies. The fumes coming off from fermentation aren't toxic, but the fumes coming off from putrefaction are. So when that's coming out of here, the pancreas has to release, the appendix, it's the P, it's catching me. The appendix is releasing antibacterial fluid to calm down that toxic mixture, get it through you and out before it poisons you. So they're the two roles of the pancreas. You'll find that people... Is there someone else? I don't know why God chose me, because my words get terribly mixed up. Thank you for being very forgiving. The appendix. So you can see that the appendix is important. If someone's had the appendix taken out, they often are prone to constipation. But the body's amazing in its ability to adapt and adjust. If you drink adequate water, have a plant-based diet, you know that person should not have any problems. So one of the main functions of the colon is to take water out so stools are formed so you can pass with ease, because what's coming out of here is quite liquid. So by the time it gets through, the water's taken out and you can pass with ease. Now see, there's a lot of grooves in the colon, and that's why a plant-based diet is very important, because that fibre sweeps the colon. We need to be swept every day. But also that fibre stimulates peristalsis all the way through the colon. Now notice when we get near the end of the colon, there's a loop, and there's a muscle called puborectalis. That's the muscle, and it holds up that loop. And we're very glad for puborectalis, because that muscle holding that last bit up prevents accidents. Do you know, when the body says go, you got to go. But when the plane's about to land, can't go. So we're very glad for puborectalis. And when a person sits on the throne, here's the throne, and the person is sitting on the throne, puborectalis remains taut. And we know things get through. But if a person makes a decision, and I'm sure that after hearing this you'll all make this decision, to put a little stool in front of the throne so that when you sit, the knees are up. When the knees are up, mimicking the squatting position, puborectalis relaxes. And when puborectalis relaxes, the colon opens and the contents pass with ease. Now, if someone is a little constipated and they decide to help things along a bit and try and push, that puts a huge amount of pressure here. And when so much pressure is put on there, something's got to give and little hemorrhoids pop out. Now, they're such nasty little things, we're just going to rub them out again. But when you have a little stool in front of the throne so that your knees are up, mimicking the squatting position, opening this up, it takes all pressure off the anus. So it will heal hemorrhoids, and it can also prevent hemorrhoids. One lady said, I sit on the throne and I felt like I haven't released everything, and I have a little look and everything is there. She said it's as if when you are squatting, you don't realise how much you're releasing because it just opens it up. Now, only 4 weeks ago, I was in India, and the last night I stayed in Delhi. And I stayed in a very beautiful 3-story apartment with a couple, and I had my own little bathroom, and I went in there, guess what it was? A hole in the floor. Now, it was a very nice hole in the floor. It was all tiled. But that's what they do. And you'll find in Asia, you'll find in Africa, in many countries, they still squat. And that's why we should be doing this every day. Okay? Now, when I got my husband to start doing that, he was not happy. He was like, oh dear, like this. Well, now he just squats up and down. And a lot of people can't squat because of knees, I understand that, but your quad muscles, these muscles here, are the ones that get you up and down. So a good way to practice is just start doing this. You can do it while you're doing the dishes. People might think you're a little bit funny, but don't worry about that. And get those thigh muscles strong, because we need to strengthen that pelvic girdle. And that pelvic girdle helps to hold everything together, because you know we're fighting gravity. Now you can go to Bed Bath and Beyond and buy a squatty potty. And squatty potties sit around the throne like something like that, so I'm not a very good drawer. And when you are not sitting on the throne to do what we call a number 2, you can just push the squatty potty in against the throne. So seriously consider puborectalis. Seriously consider investing in a squatty potty, or you can go to the $2 shop and probably get a little plastic stool, because that can make a huge difference to the health of your colon. So what happens if a person isn't going every day? Dr. Kellogg said 3 intakes of food a day should equal 3 evacuations a day. And if you notice that the colon has a mind of its own, if it's not going and you tell it to go, it won't, will it? And if it's going too much and you tell it to stop, it won't, will it? The colon has a mind of its own. And sometimes people say to me, Barbara, I'm drinking all my water, I'm eating a plant-based diet, and I'm still not going every day. Well, you know what happens? The body gets into a habit. The colon gets into a habit. So you've got to break that habit. So I'm going to give you another herb mix, and this gently stimulates peristalsis and can revive and restore the function of the colon. And we call it colon tea. I think this recipe is in my book too. So it's 1 part cascara, it's cascara sagrada, cascara, and it's 2 part licorice, and it's 3 part buckthorn, and buckthorn is a relative of the cascara. Now these are 2 barks, and that is a root, so they need to be simmered. So you put that together, and you take 1 teaspoon of that herb mix and 1 cup of water, and gentle simmer. And you always simmer your roots and your barks, your berries, for about 10 minutes. What's the dose? The dose is to take 1 cup of that tea before you go to bed at night. And usually when you wake up in the morning, you will go. Now some people only need half a cup. Some people need 1 cup. Some people need 2 cups. Some people need 3 cups. I do not know. We had a psychologist do our health program. She was in her 60s and she went once a week with help. I said, we'll get you moving. And we did. We applied castor oil compresses to her abdomen. Castor oil penetrates very, very deep and can break up the things in there. We gave her the colon tea 3 times a day. And we have a treatment at our health retreat called colonic irrigation, which is just warm water going in and helping things along. Do you know, by the 3rd day, she was going 2 times a day. That was pretty impressive for her. The skin on her face became pink. It was a bit grey before. Her eyes, the whites of her eyes became white. They looked a little grey before. At Friday, when we were having our final consult, she said, I feel so good. She said, my mind is so clear. She said, maybe this is the problem with half my patients. What is she? Psychologist? Uh-huh. Tell you, if the plumbing's not working, nothing works. Now, she told me this, and I think it's a very interesting story. She went home having 3 cups a day, and that got her going twice a day. After, I think it was 2 months, she started going 4 times a day. So she brought it back to 2 cups a day. After about another month, she started going 4 times a day. So she brought it back to 1 cup a day. After another month, she started going 4 times a day. So she stopped. So I said, I think it took about 6 months, and she's going twice a day with no help. That's the only laxative I know that actually will revive and restore colon function. Remember Psalm 104 verse 14? God gave herbs for the service of man. That's what the herbs do. That's what God designed them to do. Now some people hate this tea and some people love it. It's got a bitter, sweet aftertaste. Can you see what the digestive tea does? It restores and revives what part? Stomach. That's the digestive tea. Whereas the colon restores and revives the colon. Can you see they're different parts? And if someone's going too much, what do they take? Slippery elm. So can you see that the different herbs are used for different ailments? And so ends our journey through the gastrointestinal tract. On Thursday night, I'm going to look at the liver. And when I look at the liver, I will then show you what happens once it gets into the blood. And that is also a fascinating journey. We have a few minutes to answer questions. Yes? What's the best time to take slippery elm? If someone is going 10 times a day to the toilet, they may take it every half hour until things slow down. When things slow down, they can ease it off. But usually, a person will take it before every meal and just before bed. And so that man from Kenya who had the irritable bowel, we gave it to him 3 times a day, before each meal, and just before he went to bed at night. Yes?
And how do you prepare it?
How do you prepare it? It's a good question. It's the powdered bark of the slippery elm tree. So you put a teaspoon in a cup, and then you will put 1/4 of a cup of boiling water. And you mix it quickly and it'll go smooth. And then you put 1/4 of a cup of cold water in, and that'll just bring it up to the right temperature. If you pour warm water in, it'll go all lumpy. So it's a bit of an art to getting it smooth. It doesn't matter, you know, my son Peter liked it lumpy, but most people like it smooth, yes? You can give probiotic to a 3-year-old. Probiotic needs to be taken 3/4 of an hour before breakfast so it goes down to the colon. And remember I said if a woman has a baby via cesarean section, that can be painted on the nipple before the morning feed. There's a question there, yeah? How many times a day can you take a probiotic? Now, remember your stomach's very acid, so you never take it at the mealtime because that acid can wipe out the probiotic. So usually, ideally, you take it 3/4 of an hour before breakfast. So it'll go down there. So once a day is enough. Yes?
I have a friend that's going to Kenya, and they are suggesting for her to take this type of vaccine: typhoid, hepatitis A and B, yellow fever, meningococcal, tetanus, and
Yeah, there's no need to be vaccinated. I fly all over the world and I never get vaccinated.
no.
No. No, there's no need. Yes?
Is that information in your book?
Which information?
All the information you gave us plus the
My book is an in-depth explanation or exploration of my lecture last night. But one chapter in my book is called The Stomach's Secret Weapon, Hydrochloric Acid. So that chapter on the stomach doesn't go into the detail that I've gone with this. But on YouTube, there is this lecture, and in my set of DVDs, there's this lecture. Because I never use notes, the lectures are always a little bit different, but the basics right, yeah? Which probiotic would I recommend? I don't know what probiotics you've got in America, but I would go for a vegetarian probiotic. No, I'm not familiar with American ones. Yes?
What I should understand, the lecture for tonight is not in the book, it's only for last night.
My book contains... Sorry. Is what I presented tonight in my book. In my book is the stomach. In my book are things that are not in my DVDs. And in my DVDs are things that are not in my book. So my book is an in-depth exploration of the lecture last night. It's really the role of microbes in disease. And it does talk about the stomach. But there is a lecture on YouTube and in my set of DVDs on the gut, which is what I showed tonight. Yes? How often can aloe vera? Well, it depends. I mean, you can take it every hour if you want, or you can take it 3 times a day if you want. It depends. It depends on what the problem is. Yes?
I was once a vegan, but I was working night shifts, so I got really weak and I was fainting a lot, passing out. So I went back to eating fish. I know they said that the vegetables don't have as like much nutrients as it did years back. Is it possible to be a vegan without having
This is a very good question. This lady got weak doing night duty just on a vegan diet. Most vegans eat too much wheat and too many carbohydrates. Most vegans do not eat enough protein. And you don't have to go to fish, because unfortunately fish are unsafe today. It's the beans. So there's only one type of recipe in my book. It's beans, because most people don't know how to prepare beans. And they don't realise all the wonderful things you can do with legumes. One lady said, I just get so sick of them, but then she just does the same thing over and over. So we need to be having, remember, generous amounts of protein. That's beans. I eat beans every meal. Nuts and seeds every meal. Yeah. Well, I've been a vegan, vegetarian for 40 years and I don't take any B12. And I never have blood tests, never have blood tests. Huh? Why would I have a blood test? I feel fantastic. My energy levels are extreme. And I believe it's because of what I'm eating and it's because of my exercise. And I haven't always done everything right. I didn't do it right between the ages of 16 and 25. I did it really wrong. But the body's very forgiving and it can recover. So I believe the missing link, and the reason why vegetarians, vegans get sick or get weak is because they're not eating enough protein.
What could cause the B12 to escalate beyond the normal level, and if so, how do you bring that down?
What would cause B12 to be high? I am not aware of any dangers of high B12. Your brain will be working really good, yes? Do you need to detox the body first? Depends. Depends. Depends who you are, depends what you've been through, depends what's built up in your body. My lecture on the liver on Thursday night, I'll be defining detox, and you will understand all that. There's a question there?
You mentioned the preparation for beans, boiling and through that. Are we losing any nutrients when we do it that way?
A lot of people think that when they throw the water away that they cook beans in, they're throwing nutrients away. You're throwing waste away. But never throw the water away that you cook your vegetables in, because then you'll be throwing the minerals away. We're eating beans for the protein. And as those dried beans, they just give off a waste, and you've got to throw that waste away. And one man, when I was in Tennessee a few months ago, he said, "Oh, but I love the pot liquor." I'd never heard of pot liquor. Have you heard of pot liquor? Pot liquor is the liquid that the beans are cooked in. You can get your pot liquor. Your pot liquor can develop in that last hour of cooking, once you've rinsed that dirty water away. And but you know what? This man that loved the pot liquor, oh, he had terrible gas. And then I prepared the beans, and he got his pot liquor, And no gas.
Okay, the doctors usually say people who are diabetic that they should eat 6 small meals. What do they do?
Don't eat 6 small meals. The question was that doctor says a diabetic should eat 6 small meals. If you go to YouTube, I did a meeting at Amazing Discoveries a year ago called Decoding Diabetes. But really, our liver lecture, I'll be touching on that. Everyone that comes to us with diabetes, within 36 to 48 hours, they're having to greatly reduce their medication because they're on too much insulin. And we had one man, he was on 90 units of insulin a day. After 2 weeks when he left us, he was on 10 units of insulin a day. He emailed me 3 months later and he's on no medication at all. Wow. Just incredible. Yes? There's one, yes?
Aloe vera, it is said that preparing it, the skin should be removed. How do you?
Okay, very good question. How do you prepare aloe vera? You can peel it and mash up the clear gel or put the clear gel in the blender or juice it, because just lining the skin there's a thick yellow juice that can be irritating. Or this is what we do. We cut a big fat leaf, because we've got hundreds of aloe vera now, and we sit it in a glass for 1 hour and all the yellow slime drains out. And then you cut the very bottom off, skin and all, we slice it up and put it into, say, 2 quarts of water, and we let that sit overnight, and our guests are given aloe water the next day, that aloe water. And all through the day, as the water goes down, we keep putting more water in. And so all through the day, our guests are drinking aloe water. Does it taste nice? It's not real nice, so we put mint leaves in, which helps. So every 24 hours, that's what we do at our health retreat. We serve the aloe water, and that's very nice on the gut.
One question, Sister. One question. I just want to ask a very important question. You promised to be here Thursday night to answer some more questions.
Pardon?
You promised to be here Thursday to answer some more questions.
Yeah, more questions Thursday.
I can tell you this much, my dear brethren. Time is going. There are a lot of questions. But I'm going to ask you to just hold your question until Thursday. Right? It's after the time.
More questions Thursday, and
Right.
I really want you to get home and get to bed so that you're revived.
Amen. Amen. It has been a wonderful program, right? Amen. And you did enjoy it.